Good evening. Welcome to Spectrum Theater. My name is Lori Chesley, and I'm the Dean of Arts and Sciences here at Grand Rapids Community College. And I'm delighted to see so many students and community members here in the audience tonight. One of the really fun parts of my job is to let our community know what a great commitment GRCC has to the arts in this community. And if you'll allow me just a few minutes to tell you how wonderful our arts programs are, I would certainly appreciate that. You are, of course, sitting in one of our premier arts venues, Spectrum Theater. You may not know, but if you do, that's okay too. You may not know that we have an outstanding theater program here at GRCC, and that in this year's Grand Awards competition, our student production, N Days, performed by the GRCC players, has been nominated for 5 awards. That's really quite outstanding. So please know that at any time you can come here, check our website, and see wonderful theater performed by our students, but also by the community theater groups that we host here, Actors Theater and Jewish Theater. We also have an outstanding music program here at the college, and they have a very rich and varied performance calendar that I hope you'll go to our website to see. Our music program is one of the handful of programs in the country amongst community colleges that is accredited by the National Association of Schools of Music. They do outstanding work, and if you're not familiar with them, I hope that you will become familiar with them. They perform both in our music building on campus and regularly at the St. Cecilia Music Center. Tonight, though, we're here to talk about our visual arts department and about ArtPrize. I am extremely proud of the work that they do as well. Again, our visual arts department here at GRCC has the distinction of being a program accredited by the National Association of Schools of Art and Design, and that is a great distinction that not all programs have. You may not know this, but 10 of our GRCC faculty members have entries in ArtPrize, and we're very proud of that fact as well. And I am very partial to our art faculty, and so I hope that they will humor me. And art faculty in the audience, would you please stand up so that we could recognize you? Great. Yay. They are fine artists in their own right. You may be aware or not that we have the Collins Art Gallery here on campus with periodic shows and exhibits from artists that are local and national. We hope that you take advantage of that as well. This is the 3rd year that GRCC is proud to be an ArtPrize venue, and it's the 3rd year that we've hosted this artist panel discussion. So thank you for coming. We hope that we see you at even more events here on our campus, and thank you for supporting the arts in the Grand Rapids community. I'd like to introduce Nick Antonakis. He is the wonderful department head of our visual arts area, and he is going to introduce our speakers and moderate tonight's panel. Nick?
Thank you, Dean Chesley, for that wonderful introduction. And I also would like to take a minute to welcome our audience. Good evening to you. And thank the artists who are on the panel who came in to share their wisdom and experiences with us tonight. I'm looking forward to what they're going to be able to share with us, as always. And first of all, I would like to introduce the panel of artists. To my left, we have Gabriel Craig. He is a metalsmith, writer, and craft activist. He received his MFA degree from Virginia Commonwealth University and has worked in the collection of the Smithsonian American Art Museum. Second, next to Gabriel, we have Clay Stauffer. He's a painter who lives in Holland, Michigan and North Carolina. He received his MFA degree from the University of Chicago in 2001. And finally, to the left there, Caleb Brennan, who is an artist living in Grand Rapids. And he shares his work as a method of interaction that produces dialogue, leading to new ideas and understanding. Each one of the artists tonight will have 10 minutes to do a visual presentation. They'll tell us probably about their artistic life and about artwork maybe that is included in ArtPrize this year. They're all artists who are included in our ArtPrize venues here at GRCC. At the end, we'll have the time to ask a couple of questions of the artists. I have a couple of them prepared, and I hope that the audience will be thinking of questions that they would like to ask. So we'll get started, first of all, with Clay Stauffer. He's our first presenter. And Clay, whenever you're ready, we'll move along.
Okay, thank you. Is this working? Okay. I've got to click on this to get it going. I want to just, first of all, say it's really an honor to do this, and I appreciate the chance to talk about not just my work, but ArtPrize and art in general. I want to read just kind of a short statement about some thoughts I have about visual art and in particular painting, and then I'll try to go through the slides a little bit as I do that. I'm primarily a landscape artist, although that's changing as time goes on, so most of what I talk about will be landscape. Landscape has become our catchword for what we often see out our windows as we travel. The built environment abutted helter-skelter against abandoned buildings, the so-called wasteland, highways and rail easements, or the patterns of human work in the land below. Air travel has increased this distance, both metaphysical and factual, in our experience. These aerial abstractions bring to mind the mastery of industrial agriculture, with its depopulation of the land, reliance on irrigation, and consolidation of agricultural homesteads. The aerial viewpoint itself refers directly to the abstraction that occurs with distance, mobility, and mediation by technology. When you think about it, the aerial view is something relatively new in experience. Its effects on our imaginations and our sense of the human presence in the world has changed our understanding. I'll go back. Since the introduction of photography roughly 150 years ago, painting has had to reckon with itself continually. The hyper-proliferation and reiteration of images in television and now on the World Wide Web forces painters and painting to confront its meaning. In the wake of this reckoning, it is more important than ever to understand the plastic nature of painting. Mark Rothko recognized this in his posthumously published work, The Artist's Reality, The Philosophies of Art. He said, plasticity in painting is the process in which reality is achieved by causing forms to progress and recede. And then he writes a little bit after that, the artist invites the spectator to take a journey within the realm of the canvas. And then he adds, the journey is the skeleton, the framework of the idea. I'm interested in particular subjects such as agriculture, weather, or the built environment, and lately even bird and insect life, because they point to fundamental metaphors that open up poetic truths about our human predicament. And in a visual sense, they provide opportunities for play, contemplation, and the consideration of visual ideas, or journeys in Rothko's sense. I also want to offer the viewer an opportunity to enjoy variations on formal qualities of color, shape, line, the elements of art. Tension between restlessness and stability, which is a dynamic experience of travel, is the basis for play with formats, such as the wide, narrow panorama and the shapes within this format. Landscape is important because it addresses how we dwell in the world, and how we do so is central to our future as a species. Some of my paintings that I'll get to in a second address industrial agriculture and its effects, depopulation of the land, and as I mentioned, consolidation of agricultural homesteads. They also refer to an accelerated mining of the land and the perspective that seems to distance us from industrial agriculture, even as we admire its formal symmetries. So I'll go through some of these in the time I have left to try to illustrate. I've been fascinated with the highway as an element of the American landscape, and so a lot of my work is focused on the highway itself and the culture that surrounds the highway. Nick, how am I doing on time? I don't want to. 5 minutes, okay. This in particular, I think, was prompted by that feeling of being on the road and the sort of anonymity and facelessness and placelessness of that the American landscape can have at times. I'm going to jump around a little bit. Suburban, let me go back. I'm not doing this in any kind of a chronological order. I was just trying to run through related themes just to give you a sense of my work. When I talked about industrial agriculture, in particular, move ahead here, move back. This painting is a diptych that sort of tried to play on the nature of a painting itself and how it can put us in between the thing that we're representing or the thing that we're pointing to and where we are now. This, I don't know if you recognize it, is exit 55 off of the interstate highway near Zeeland. And I actually did 2 of these, one in spring, which is this one, and I also did one in summer. I didn't carry through the theme with fall and winter, but may do that at some point. I already showed this, but there was a point at which I was just really kind of get at more of the metaphysical conundrums in representing the highway and its sense of placelessness in the American landscape. And so that's sort of the basis for this composition. And as I mentioned, I've gotten increasingly interested in the natural world, specifically bird and insect life. And I don't have any insect paintings to show you. I'm still kind of working on those. But I did include some pieces showing bird life, which I guess is kind of a stretch from the landscape, but I think sometimes you have to follow your interests, and where they, even though it may not seem apparent to you at the time, I think it's important to keep an artistic practice fun and engaging, not something that you feel you have to sort of toil at, although that's sometimes required, but it can become boring, and then that can be the kiss of death. So I had a instructor at Kendall, John McDonald, and he used to say, you know, there's no point in doing it if it's not fun. So I think to a certain extent that's really true. So that's pretty much all I have to say at this point. I hope I've given you a sense of what my painting's about, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Clay. I said that I would ask questions at the end, but one brief question. Could you tell us a little bit about the scale of your paintings? Were they all approximately the same size? We've seen the
Oh, that's a really good question. I work a lot in a format that's about 5, maybe 6 feet wide. I did, I'm going to run through these kind of rapidly. I did do one last year for ArtPrize that was 10 feet wide, if I can find it. Here it is. So most of them are maybe 5, 6 feet wide, although those bird paintings oftentimes are smaller, a little more intimate, and that seems to be a size that I gravitate to. This is a larger painting as well. Good question, though. I should have covered that.
Thank you very much. So next we have Gabriel Craig, and so we'll get the presentation ready and we'll start.
All right. Can I, yeah.
You still want to go down the audience?
No, I think I'll be okay here. Okay, so my name's Gabriel Craig, and I'm a metalsmith, writer, and craft activist. And so those are 3 terms that I've sort of chosen to label myself because I found that like jeweler or artist really doesn't accurately convey sort of the breadth of the activities that I engage in. So I'm just going to take you through, it's kind of my condensed artist talk in 10 minutes. It's usually like an hour, so I'm going to go real fast for all you people. So I'm going to start with metalsmithing. And I was formerly trained as like an art jeweler, so this is the most recent body of work that I did. I did a residency in Houston, Texas, with my fiance and collaborator, Amy Weeks, and I'll show you a picture of her. She's actually modeling something in a second. But these are brooches. They're about 5 inches in the largest dimension, and they're completely from recycled material. That's something that I'm really interested in, is using ethically sourced materials in my work, and something that I started doing in about 2009. So here you can see there's lots of coins. There's like a rusty nail, chains that are from old watch fobs, and then a lot of reclaimed precious metal. And here we were really looking at things like 1920s surrealist paintings. Found objects were really big in art jewelry in the 1970s, so we're sort of drawing on that form language, influenced by things like t-shirt graphics today and couture fashion accessories. So that's some of the things that we were looking at and that were really feeding the work. I sort of love to collect coins and then cut them up and appropriate little pieces. So in this slide, you can see a piece of a Sacré-Cœur commemorative coin that I got when I was in Paris, and that on a fish on, is that your right? It's my right, if it's still your right. Okay, great. That fish, the face is like George Washington's face off of a quarter, so that's pretty fun. And then this is my fiance Amy and collaborator on this body of work. That was the only necklace from the series. So I just want to take you through the process really quick. of what it's like to recycle, use recycled materials. So on the top left, that's a silver bangle that was really pretty ugly that I wanted to sort of reform, and it's half of it, and you have that serpent's head on the top, and then if you go down to the bottom, you can see that I lopped that serpent's head off, cut that silver bar, forged out or hammered out the ends so that they kind of tapered, and then in the top right, you can see that I scrolled them back on themselves. I filled in some of the texture with gold, melted down a little nugget of gold and started chasing that or hammering that, and then here is the final piece. Ooh. So that's kind of, my background as a jeweler. But as you can see, this is what's in the gallery over in the Collins Gallery. And I really approach metalsmithing as like a theme or something to explore in my work. So, that's my training technically, but I'm also interested in the social and cultural value of working by hand and a metalsmithing. So this piece you can kind of see in the gallery and explore. Hopefully you've had some time to look at it, and really it's about me exploring that relationship between people and the practice of metalsmithing. And hopefully you've had a chance to look at it and listen to the audio, which is actually brass band music, which is really nostalgic and romantic. And I tried to set up this situation where you're seeing the piece and just our relationship with blacksmithing. A general public, it has that same sort of romantic connotation, or makes us feel like old-timey, you know what I mean? So I really wanted to push that and maybe not be ashamed, as some craft artists tend to be, but sort of own that and live in that space and say, you know what, that's what we are, and I'm still going to do it anyways. So I just installed an installation in Houston, Texas that I've been working on for 2 years with a music composer. Named Michael Remsen, and that piece is called SoundForge. It consists of a video component, and this is sort of like right when you enter the gallery. I'll show you a clip in just a second of what the video looks like, but Michael composed a 16-minute percussion composition, and I took video of people actually blacksmithing and synced that up almost like a music video, and then as you walk into the space, you're confronted with these large musical instruments that are made out of steel and tuned keys. The keys are tuned to the same 5 notes in the percussion composition, so you walk in, you grab a mallet, you start playing, and your interaction is pretty seamless in terms of like the auditory harmony. So here's like a close-up of what it's like. So this just went up this past weekend, it just opened, and so it's really fresh. I don't have a whole lot to say about it. I'm talking pretty fast. Okay, so here's a quick video clip from that SoundForge. Okay, so it goes on. It's 16 minutes. There's a number of different movements throughout the piece, and then it loops back on itself. It was a really interesting interactive work that I really wanted people to be able to engage the process of smithing and forging in maybe a way that they hadn't thought about. And really the educational opportunities and programming that we were able to do with that piece, I'm very excited about. Okay, so now I'll move on to the writing. I'm also a writer. I like to write about craft and things that are related to my professional, metalsmithing practice. I wrote an article for American Craft magazine that was on the cover. That was pretty sweet. It was about an artist named Lauren Kalman who uses, she has training as a jeweler, but sort of uses jewelry materials in a really unconventional way to explore sort of the margins of body adornment. So you can see the gold leaf on the tongue, and you can't really see it, but she does sort of piercings that mimic skin irritations or skin rashes, skin conditions. So that was an interesting project to write about her work. My most recent article was about the use of two-dimensional graphic content in, counterculture content in flat graphic imagery in contemporary jewelry. That's a mouthful. And that was just published a few months ago in Metalsmith magazine. I do catalog essays for, this one is from DIY Revolution in Handicrafts at the Society for Contemporary Craft in Pittsburgh. And it was really about the role of craft as a form of counterculture protest. So you can tell I'm into craft as counterculture. That's a recurring theme. And then also, I'm a contributing blogger to Art Jewelry Forum, which is sort of like a jewelry advocacy group, or like art jewelry advocacy, really. Okay. Craft activism, this is sort of the catch-all term for other things that I do, and I'll just tell you about a couple projects that I was involved in recently. I'm interested in where metal comes from, and this has sort of been a pet issue of mine for a while since I myself realized where metal came from. Earlier I talked about recycling, but I sort of want to present that to a larger audience than just other metalsmiths. So right now I'm working on another article for American Craft Magazine where I organized a gold prospecting trip to South Dakota, and I recruited the gentleman on the left, Todd Pownell of Cleveland, Ohio, who is a studio jeweler, and Jenna Wainwright and Rajiv Jaswa of Manhattan, who are getting married, and we went to South Dakota to go gold prospecting to try and find the gold for their wedding bands. So that was the plan. To really sort of, the jewelry, the precious metal supply chain is very opaque, and so what I really wanted to do was sort of make that really transparent, and as a thought exercise, but also to expose people to the issue in not such a heavy-handed way. So we went out, we camped at this beautiful lake in the Black Hills. We dug a big hole, and I'm not gonna like get really into what it's all about, gold prospecting in the process, but suffice it to say, we found a little bit of gold in our pans. We found a very little bit of gold. That was all the gold we found. And then we actually had a donation from a nonprofit organization called Ethical Metalsmiths to supplement the gold that we didn't actually find. So, but you can see inside the rings, those little cavities, that's where the gold, Todd melted it down. And so this will be an article in American Craft coming up. I gotta move fast, gotta move fast. So we also, it was my first time seeing an open pit mine. This is the Homestake mine in Leeds, South Dakota, right next to Deadwood, if you guys are familiar with Deadwood. And I mean, I've been interested in mining issues for a long time, but I think this just blew me away. So this is an open pit mine that's half a mile by a quarter mile deep, and then underneath that is 8,000 feet of shafts and 600 miles of tunnels. So the environmental devastation that happens, even in what's really one of the most responsible or most respected mines in North America, which is now closed, by the way, but it's still catastrophic. So yeah, I'll probably spend a long time trying to wrap my head around why we mine like that. Okay, so then probably the project that I'm best known for is the Pro Bono Jeweler. It started in 2007. I took my jeweler's bench out onto the street and tried to talk to people about how I make things and engage them in jewelry making. And then at the end, I give away simple silver bands and ask people to think about working by hand and think about what they saw, sort of grassroots, spreading the word about craft. So I've had the first series started in Richmond. I've done it in Oxford, Ohio. I did a series in Houston, Texas, sponsored by the Contemporary Arts Museum Houston. I participated in Luminaria, which is a performance festival in San Antonio, and at this performance there's 300,000 people. It blew me away. Am I ready in about 10 minutes, Nick? Okay, so I'm just gonna run through these real quick, and there was a video of the Pro Bono Jeweler, and do I have time to show a video or no? I'm out of time. It's about a minute. Okay. Do it. Okay. This is the last piece I'm going to show. It's called The Gospel According to Craft. When I was out there in the Pro Bono Jeweler, standing behind the bench, it felt a little bit preachy, and so I decided to explore that idea. And this is a 30-second video that sort of is the afterthought. Excuse me, have you accepted craft as your road to personal salvation? Hello, ma'am. Do you have time to talk about craft today? Excuse me, sir. Have you accepted craft as your road to personal salvation? All right. You folks have time to talk about craft today?
Craft?
Yes. Craft is the 21st century model that will save us from our late capitalist demise. Craft, working by hand for a better tomorrow.
Oh. Personal crafts, handcrafts.
Handcrafts, yes, working by hand.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I agree.
That's just an excerpt. And all my videos you can see on my website, GabrielCraigMetalsmith.com.
Thank you, Gabriel.
You're welcome.
And now we're ready for Caleb Brennan.
Yeah, I don't have as many slides as he does or as much to say, but so I'll talk a little slower. But I can relate to the idea of feeling like a preacher. My piece, well, the pieces I've been working on have to do with the crucifixion. And this is the piece that's an ArtPrize, just so you can kind of know which one I'm talking about. And I try not to approach it in the same way as maybe some other people do. I try to deal with an event and try not to deal with all the baggage between that event and my life. And there's a lot of baggage there for a lot of people. And I kind of found it interesting because I put in notebooks. I'll get more into the pieces that I have now, but I put it out in notebooks, and it seems like people have a lot of baggage that they want to unload in those notebooks, and it's very interesting. My approach to the sculpture, most people look at the sculptures and see the figures. I actually come at it from the structural point of view. This is an earlier piece, and I like to compare the hard edge sculpture or the structure with the more organic. Here the organic is just the curve of the arch, and I have used like crumpled paper or other forms that are embedded into a structure. So, and I started working on, in my sketchbook, I just started noticing, well, I first started noticing crosses appearing. Basically, if you're starting a sketch, you make a line this way and you make a line that way. That the horizontal line can become an eyebrow and the vertical can become a nose, or it could become a cross, or it could become many other things. A few years ago, I was included in an alumni show from Spring Arbor College, where I was an undergraduate, and they liked the piece and they wanted to buy it, except for the spot they wanted to put it, it wouldn't fit. So they commissioned me to do a piece that fits in the window. And it was kind of a tricky thing because the access to the window is a small opening, maybe about this big, and so I had to figure out how to fit everything in that hole. It was kind of a fun project. But the piece that I did was more of a casting, a body cast. This is a urethane foam, but it looks like it's painted to look heavy like plaster. I used my son as a model for the previous one and this one. And then when ArtPrize came around, he said he wasn't going to model anymore because it was very painful for him to be in these odd poses for so long. So I began working on some sketches. These are some images of some sketches. I'm pushing buttons, not meaning to here. This was part of the first ArtPrize, my first ArtPrize display, and kind of showing where the idea came from. You can see some of the sketches. Some of them are very literal in terms of interpretation. There's a guy in a cross. There's a soldier with a spear, which reoccurs in this image. The middle piece is actually trying to understand what a person would feel if they were being crucified or beaten with a whip or whatever. What parts were part of the story. And trying to understand that part of the story was important. I actually built a thing to hang on in my backyard so I could photograph models hanging on it. I don't have those to show you, but but it's kind of weird that, I don't. hopefully nobody was like cops going down the alley or something, but oops, here we go. This is the first piece. My first venue was at Purple East, and in the figure I was trying to what I was talking about, understand the pain and the feeling of what a body would be going through just before death and crucifixion. But I was also working on this construction and how the two forms interacted with each other, and people basically just saw the large figure, and my aunt, who's a very dear 80-year-old woman, asked me if they provided the stand for me to hang my sculpture on, which is understandable. But with this, I was trying to create a definite one side versus the back side. I don't think anybody really paid attention to the back side. But the wood was walnut, and the back side was finished off plain and smooth and everything, but I don't think anybody really caught that. Then last year I did a piece that was in front of St. Mark's on Division over here. And again, people wondered if I was borrowing their Christmas creche for the to put my sculptures in. But in this one, I was focusing more on the part of the story where the one thief or convict was ridiculing the other man, ridiculing Jesus, along with the people in the crowd. And that, to me, seems like a very odd thing. I think we do that a lot. You know, like we're in a bad situation, we'll go to other people. You know, they're not. We're in the same situation, but somehow it makes us feel better to get them. And I included some extra people in there, just kind of decomposing to the side, and I think that kind of threw some people. One woman thought that I was doing a series of evolution, showing the evolution of the crucifix, but I'm not sure where that came from. But this is the guy sticking his tongue out at the Jesus figure, and then probably the bright colors and whatnot are a little bright for my personal taste, but considering that people would be viewing it from a distance, I tried to make it a little more engaging. I look at it as a way to engage people. With both of these, I put out a notebook for people to write comments, and for me, that's where I get my reward. It'd be nice to get the $250,000 too, but I wouldn't turn it down. But this is worth it for me. And then this time, the figures become very blocky, and in this case, it was actually post-mortem, and all the pain, all the life, etc., has gone out of it. And then there's the Roman with the spear. I look back in some of my drawings, and there's several from several years ago where I don't know, I guess I have a fascination with the spear going in. I'm not into piercings or anything like that. Actually, when I see people putting their earrings in or whatnot, it's just kind of, I have to look away. Or if they're getting a shot or something, I'm very squeamish about that kind of thing. But for some reason, this is recurring for me. With this piece, I also made use of an opportunity to show in multiple venues, and that's something that's exciting for me, and the idea of not having the whole thing in one spot, that you have to see it over a period of spaces. And the main part is at the Bostwick Commons there, but the first part, I think of it as a play. The first part is at the Kent County Republican Party headquarters, and then the final epilogue is at St. Mark's inside. So that's my piece.
Thank you, Caleb. And now, as promised, we've come to the second segment of our event, and that is the question and answer part. I'd like to ask a couple of questions. I'd love to answer them too, I suppose. We'd like to keep it brief because I'd like to open the floor to the audience for questions too. So maybe a couple of minutes for each artist to answer this. My first one is, what recommendations would you make for aspiring artists regarding any of the following? Scale of the artwork, content, or context? And we'll just start to the left of me with Gabriel, who is lucky enough to be just to the left of me.
Let's see. Well, I guess I'll talk about, I'll start with scale because starting my career mostly at the jewelry scale, and then pretty recently moving into larger installation type works. As a jeweler, it's really easy to send your work in the mail to exhibitions, also very cheap. This most recent exhibition, I had to build a crate for the first time, and instead of like $10 or $15, including insurance to mail it halfway across the country or all the way across the world, maybe like $100, it was like several $1,000s to create something that's really heavy. So I think if you get to the point in your career where you are moving into national and international exhibitions, I think scale is something you have to contend with, and just be aware of the costs involved. Also, the time commitment with working on something a little bit larger. I think the SoundForge project that I talked about really briefly, that was a 2-year project as opposed to a piece of jewelry. I think the longest I've ever worked on one piece of jewelry was maybe a couple months, and even then it just sat on my jeweler's bench for a little while I was thinking about where to take it next. So the scale issue is, I think, if you're working bigger, you have to work slower, or you have to get more people involved to work for you. So I think that was another thing, working on the SoundForge project, hiring an assistant for the first time to actually help me because I just physically couldn't do all the work myself. What was the question again? just making sure I'm still answering it and not
Certainly.
Just going off.
No, I think you did very well.
Okay, great.
But we'll have Caleb next, and it's scale, content, or context.
Well, I think scale is an important question. My pieces are a lot larger than jewelry, and then you have to figure out what to do with them, how to store them. My house is kind of full right now. I think...
These are being very practical tonight.
Yeah, whatever the other two, I'll try to...
Content? Content.
Okay, my work is very content-based, and that's something that when I was coming up through school and whatnot, abstract expressionism, you try and minimize the narrative. The form was the content. I think art has room for content, and I think the content needs to be relevant to yourself. I don't know. I guess that's about all I can say. It needs to be. I think a lot of people in ArtPrize, I'll use ArtPrize as an example, have done things content-wise just to get a reaction from the crowd. I don't know if that makes it. I think it cheapens what they've done. I think so.
Thank you. And Clay?
I think it's important to do a lot of different things. looking at, well, sculpture or painting, try some big things, try some small things, see what corresponds to the ideas that you have. As far as form and content go, content, I mean, they're sort of two sides of the same coin, and I wouldn't get too hung up on a particular message or but then if that's what motivates you, I mean, I follow through with it and see where it goes. Look at a lot of other people who their work in the medium that you're working in, and try to learn as much as you can from others, because that's an ongoing process. But I guess do a lot of different things, different sizes.
Thank you. And now for a fun question. I've been waiting to ask this one. If you could change one thing about ArtPrize, what would it be? Who would like to start this one?
Since I'm to the left, I'll go right ahead. So I've been following ArtPrize for the first 2 years, and then I'd been living in the South, and I moved back to Michigan. So I thought, you know, like distance-wise, I'd want to participate this year. And for me, the venue matching process was pretty difficult. And I think this is a weird venue because, you know, Nick's sitting right next to me. But I'm really happy with the venue I ended up in. But just like the courtship process and how you matched with a venue was really unwieldy and difficult to navigate as an artist. And I approached several venues, which I thought, you know, their venue made sense with my work. I had an audio piece, and I approached you know, St. Cecilia's, and I had, you know, a work about metalsmithing, and I approached a jewelry store. And, you know, there's just the volume, I think, of artists that are trying to contact these venues is very, very difficult for them to deal with. And I think my experience was also that the people at the organizations and even the private businesses that are trying to decide on the artists are not maybe people who are used to wearing the hat of curator or registrar or other positions in the art world. And it's so I think what's ended up happening is that there's a first round of jurying that happens by the people that get thrust into those positions, and that's really, I think, you know, the first jury round that maybe the public doesn't see. So I think that maybe that there's a better way to do that than sort of the free-for-all that happens.
Thank you. Clay?
Well, I'm really, and I'm not just saying this, I really like the gallery where the Collins Art, I mean, when I got matched up, I was like, yeah, that's great. It's a good location, and it's got a nice ambiance to it. So, having said that, I would agree with Gabriel about the matching process. I mean, that's where the rubber meets the road, and I don't, you know, I've gone through it in my own mind. How would I change it? Would it be better to have a lottery? I don't know if that would be better. You could complicate it by trying to have a lottery by different media, different. So I don't know. I don't have any really bright suggestions, but I do think the matching process is fraught with a lot of. It's sort of a pain, but yeah. I don't have any.
It's honest. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Just one?
Oh, you can have two.
No, I think like he was pointing out, things that are a problem, to change them, there's like a give and take with each thing. I guess the thing that I would like to see more of is a way to get people out of the 3 or 4 blocks downtown, get them out into the neighborhoods. I think it'd be good for the neighborhoods to have that kind of interaction with different kinds of people coming in, seeing art. I think a lot of artists are, you know, trying to get into the Bob because that's where you get votes. But I for myself, and I think for several artists, it's not about winning the money, it's an opportunity to show your work and meet other people and talk about things, get new ideas. So I think there's maybe a little bit too much emphasis put on who the winner is, or if that's, you know, a good artist or a bad artist. But
Thank you very much. And now we'll proceed with questions from the audience. Do we have a mic in the audience, or I can bring one? Do we have any questions? I've got to do my Donahue here. Those are the old days, of course.
My question's for Gabriel. I noticed you said you work with a lot of like found metals and other found objects. And can't that present a lot of problems when you're trying to join them? Because some metals can't be joined with others with certain, you know, certain temperatures, you can release fumes, all that kind of thing. So how do you solve those problems? How do you even find out what it is you have?
Well, a lot of the material I know where it's coming from. If it's coming from my own, you know, recycled, you know, my own waste material, I usually know what's in that. Some things with like coins, I don't know what metal's in them, and sometimes I'll heat them up and see what they do under ventilation. But, you know, the main thing is that, at least with that first body of work that I showed you, extensive use of cold connections, things like riveting and tabbing and, you know, trapping in different ways. Yeah. So, yeah, cold connections, totally underrated as a joining method.
My question's also for you, Gabriel. You mentioned craft activism. I think that was your term?
Yes.
Okay. A lot of times craft is sort of the dirty word in the fine art world, and you are trying to revive craft. And I also see that you're adding a lot of contemporary concept to your pieces. So can you talk about what people might see as the difference between craft and what you're trying to do with a more conceptual approach?
Yeah. I think, like I said, I approach craft and metalsmithing as a theme for my work, and so it's not always a craft object that I produce, but that's always the tie that binds. Yeah, I like to, you know, have craft as a verb. So whether it's like a performance that involves craft or a work that's about something that's a craft process, and that maybe that is maybe the anchor of my identity as an artist. And you know, if someone was like, Gabriel's an artist, I wouldn't be like, no, actually I'm not an artist, I'm a metalsmith, writer, craft. I wouldn't do that, but I just feel that term more accurately describes what I think I do. So does that answer it? Yeah, okay, great.
Clay, I'm intrigued. It seems like a lot of your work has a particular aspect ratio. It's almost, is that informed by looking out of a vehicle? It seems wide and narrow and kind of compressed.
I think it is. In fact, I did a painting that was the proportions of my car window one time, which because I didn't do any more, but I just wanted to shaped panel like that because I thought we see so much of the world around us through window, whether it's a car window or a home window. I think the panoramic format that I use, very horizontal, obviously, is I find it really restful. And I think I'm biased, just maybe neurokinesthesiologically, if that's a word, to see things more horizontally. I don't know, I grew up out west on the plains, and that could be, you know, maybe there's something there, I don't know. But when I see a square, it actually looks more horizontal than it probably actually is. So, but yeah, I think that, I mean, I think the way we frame things architecturally, mechanically in our cars is really important to how we sense the world.
Yeah. Seems to fit the field of vision, too, nicely.
Right, yeah. I do a lot of panoramas for some reason, and there's an artist, Rackstraw Downs. I don't know how many of you know his work. If you haven't seen his work, look it up. He's really a really fine painter. He has a whole theory about that he came up with about curvature and the way it's sort of a new take on linear perspective, and he does a lot of panoramic pictures as well, landscapes. So it'd be good to look at his work. Rackstraw Downs is his name. Interesting guy.
My message is for Gabriel. I'm really interested in the metalsmithing, so I'm kind of curious. I have two questions for you.
Sure.
In your beginning pieces, when it came to the jewelry part and the coal connection, one, do you sketch out your ideas? Do you put something together, or does it just come to you? Two is, you'd mentioned that you had started a piece, you left it at your bench, a couple of months later you went back to it to see which direction you wanted to go with it. Where do you get your inspiration to figure that out?
Yeah, well, here, let me pull up an image of what we're talking about. And so again, this body of work was done collaboratively with my fiance while we were in a residency, and really it was like a collaboration between the two of us. And I think my sensibility of design and my interest in 19th century design really meeting her sense of design and her sensibilities. And so I think that what would happen is we laid out an entire huge table with brown paper, and then we had elements, and then we would put them down, like a head, and then we would draw around that. And then another person would, one of us would come along later and move stuff around to do a new drawing, and then it would get too muddled, and we move it over and keep the elements that we would like, and then maybe we would connect a few pieces together and then come back. And we worked back and forth very intuitively, and so that took a lot longer. I think when I work by myself on a piece of jewelry, I'm more inclined to maybe draw the entire piece how I envision it, and then as I'm working, I'll sort of, if something else occurs to me, I'll stop the piece where it is, do a drawing of what it could look like, and then decide based on that. So yeah, drawing inspiration, I think maybe we can open this up to everyone, because I think all artists draw inspiration from different places. I love art history, and so I look at a lot of art historical sources, definitely cathedrals from the 12th and 13th century in France and England. I love the stonework on those, and yeah, I draw a lot of inspiration from that. You're welcome. Where do you guys draw inspiration from? Sorry, I'm stealing other people's questions.
We have time for one last question. Let's see a person in the audience. Here we go.
This question is for everybody. You all seem very passionate about your work. Was there any moment of inspiration or deciding factor that made you into artists?
I'll jump in. Was the question what really sparked us to get going?
When you knew that you were going to be an artist.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the role of teachers is incredibly important. Somebody who, because most kids, I remember somebody once said to me that his daughter, he told his daughter that he taught art, and she said, doesn't everybody know how to do that? And I think the point there is that we all sort of do that naturally. If somebody does come along in your life and sees something there and encourages you, and I think that's extremely important. And then that can, not everybody's going to follow up on that, but I think there is that sense of, oh, this is what I was meant to do. an engagement with the materials, whether it's metal or paint or wood, whatever it might happen to be. So, and an interest in shaping, using those materials to reflect on how you see the world, your reality.
I would agree with what you just said, so I don't know what I can add. I think a lot of it started when I was young, going to the art museum, and as a family, my father hired an art student to come in and teach us how to paint. And of course, I was like 3rd grade, so all my paintings were volcanoes. And they looked like brown volcanoes because all the colors would blend together. And I think, you know, you go on through school and people approve of what you're doing. I think there was a time period, maybe after grad school, and now at least I went through kind of a, you know, I knew how to do this, but it wasn't important to me. And kind of with this last project, I started having fun in a different kind of way. So I'm kind of curious to see where that's going to go.
My father is a salesman. His father was a salesman, and his father was a horse thief. So, like the history of tacit or tactile knowledge in my family does not run deep at all. And so I think when I was in art school and I took a metalsmithing class and I started using my hands and started understanding like simple mechanics, I think that really just turned a switch in my brain that I mean, there was no going back for me after that. So I sort of discovered why I have an opposable thumb, and that's to hold a tool. And yeah, I think that was the moment for me. Thanks, great question. Oh, yeah, it's for texting, I'm sorry.
Thank you, thank you. What a nice way to close. We unfortunately have run out of time, so we must bring this to the end. But at the same time, I want to invite everybody to a small reception that we have in the lobby of this building, the Spectrum Theater. So please join us, and you can meet the artists and ask them more questions during that time. So thank you again. My name is Nick Antonakis, and have a good evening.